Hi everyone. I never thought I'd be the type to post in a place like this, but here we are. I'm Rachel 36F, and my husband Adrian 39M has been my partner for almost 12 years. On paper, we were the definition of steady. 2 kids, Eli 8 and Sophie 6, a mortgage we grumbled about but managed, and a dog who insists on sleeping horizontally across our bed. For most of our marriage, Adrian thrived on routine. He woke at 6:30, brewed the same dark roast coffee, kissed me on the forehead, and left for his insurance job, travel mug in hand. He wasn't the romantic type, but he was the guy who paid bills on time and remembered to put air in my tires. That reliability used to feel safe, until it started to feel like distance wearing a friendly face. The first red flag was almost laughable. A new aftershave. Adrian hates shopping, yet suddenly he smelled like cedarwood and something faintly spicy. When I teased him about it, he said a client had given it to him as a Christmas freebie. In March. Then came the late nights at the office. He claimed there was a huge account they were trying to land, but when I offered to bring him dinner one evening, he practically jumped out of his skin and said, "No, don't bother, I'm in and out of meetings." His phone became an extra limb. Always face down, notifications silenced. He started locking it, which he'd never done before. He also began guarding his gym bag like it held state secrets. If I moved it while cleaning, he'd swoop in, mumbling something about important files. Even his demeanor around the kids shifted. He used to read Eli bedtime stories with silly voices and help Sophie braid her doll's hair. Now he rushed through bedtime, citing exhaustion, then sat alone in the living room scrolling on his phone. First, I chalked it up to stress. Work was hectic, and my mom had been unwell, which meant I was stretched thin. I told myself I was being paranoid, that every marriage hits seasons where one partner withdraws a little. But deep down I felt it, like a thin crack running through glass, invisible at certain angles but threatening to splinter everything if I looked too closely. I started keeping mental notes. The unexplained receipts, a café we'd never been to, a gas station way out of his normal route, the sudden attention to his wardrobe, the way he sometimes smiled at texts then quickly swiped them away when I got near. I wasn't ready to accuse him of anything. I just couldn't shake the gnawing thought that the man I trusted for over a decade had stepped somewhere I couldn't follow. I wish I could say there was one big cinematic moment where everything clicked, but the truth was more like a slow leak. One drip at a time until I couldn't ignore the puddle. It started with a receipt I found in Adrian's coat pocket while doing laundry. A tiny slip from a bistro downtown we'd never been to. Dated last Friday. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and a dessert sampler. When I asked about it later, he barely blinked and said it was a client lunch. At 9 at night? He laughed it off, told me I was reading too much into it, and kissed the top of my head. But I couldn't unsee the little hearts someone had doodled next to the signature on the credit slip. That night I stayed up scrolling through old photos on my phone, trying to remember the last time Adrian had looked at me with real warmth. The answer hurt more than I wanted to admit. Then came the gym bag incident. Sophie spilled her juice on the rug, and I moved Adrian's bag so I could clean up. It was heavier than usual. Inside, tucked under a towel, was a leather-bound notebook tied with twine. Not his style at all. When I flipped it open, I found pages of notes in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Little sketches of stars, quotes about living boldly, and one line that made my stomach drop. Friday at the observatory, can't wait to see you under the stars again. S. I put it back exactly as I'd found it, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe S was a colleague, maybe the observatory thing was a team-building event. Ridiculous, I know. But my gut screamed otherwise. A few days later, I decided I couldn't live in limbo anymore. Adrian said he was going to grab drinks with a coworker after work. I called my sister, who came over to watch the kids, and I drove downtown. I don't know what I expected to find, but I didn't expect to see my husband sitting at a candlelit table with a woman whose scarf fluttered in the breeze as she laughed. A sly, knowing laugh I'd never heard before. They weren't huddled over spreadsheets. They were leaning close, hands brushing, sharing a dessert off one plate. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying not to throw up, watching him feed her a bite of cake with the same fork he'd used to eat our anniversary tiramisu just a few weeks earlier. I drove home numb, my fingers gripping the steering wheel until they cramped. The notebook, the receipt, the late nights. It all snapped together like a cruel puzzle. By the time Adrian walked in, smelling faintly of cedar and something sweet, I'd already decided I wasn't going to let him gaslight me into doubting my own eyes. By the time Adrian came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the leather-bound notebook right in front of me. The house was quiet, the kids were asleep, even the dog seemed to sense something was off. He walked in humming, loosened his tie, and froze when he saw me. Hey Ratch. Why are you up? His eyes flicked to the notebook like it might explode. I asked him straight out. Who's Serena? The look on his face was almost comical surprise, then a too quick smile. Serena? Oh, she's a client. We met at a seminar. She's helping me land a new account. I kept my voice calm. Do you usually land accounts at an observatory? Over dessert. He shifted, pulling at his collar. You're misunderstanding. She just likes stargazing. It's networking. Networking. At an abandoned observatory. My hands were shaking, but I pushed the notebook toward him. She left this in your gym bag. Care to explain the hearts in the margin? That's when the flood of excuses began. He claimed he was mentoring her, that she was lonely, that he didn't want to bother me with work stuff. When I pressed harder, the story twisted. Suddenly they were brainstorming charity events under the stars. Then he insisted she was going through a rough time, and he'd been a shoulder to lean on. I asked if he'd kissed her. He paused too long, then said, it was just one time. I pushed her away right after. I reminded him I'd seen them feeding each other cake. He sighed dramatically like I was the one inconveniencing him and muttered, fine, maybe a few times. But it didn't mean anything. Hearing him minimize it while I could still see the way he'd looked at her made something in me crack wide open. I told him lying about a single kiss when he'd built a whole secret world with her wasn't just disrespectful. It was cruelty. Adrian's response? He got angry. He accused me of spying, of ruining a friendship, of overreacting because nothing physical happened beyond a kiss. I asked him how many times he'd left work to meet her, how many nights he'd sat at our table texting her while I told him about the kids' science projects. He refused to answer, grabbed his coat, and said he needed air. He didn't come back until after midnight. By then I was curled on the couch, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the man who once promised me honesty would rather protect a lie than our marriage. The morning after Adrian stormed out, I woke up on the couch with the dog's head heavy on my lap. For a second I forgot why my chest felt like someone had stacked bricks on it, and then the night before came rushing back. Adrian was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. He said, we should talk. As if we just argued over which brand of cereal to buy. I could barely look at him. My voice came out hoarse. I don't even know who you are anymore. He promised he'd end things with Serena. Said it wasn't serious, that he just got caught up. He even tried to spin it into a compliment. Apparently, his affair made him realize how much he valued what we had. That sentence hit me like ice water. The days that followed were a haze. I went to work on autopilot, packed lunches, answered emails, but inside I felt hollow. At night I replayed every scene in my head. Him smiling at texts during dinner, that receipt in his coat pocket, the observatory under a sky full of stars. I thought we were steady, maybe even boring, but at least we were safe. Now everything was jagged. My body kept betraying me. I'd be fine one minute, folding laundry, and the next I'd feel tears sliding down my face without warning. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, I dreamed of him and her laughing in places that used to belong to us. The little café where he once proposed brunch dates, the trail by the lake where we'd walked with Eli in a stroller. What hurt most wasn't just the cheating. It was how easy the lies came. The way he'd looked me in the eye and told me stories about late meetings, while planning nights under the stars with someone else. Every memory of him now had a shadow attached. I found myself questioning everything. Was he lying when he said he loved my cooking? When he called me his best friend? Were all our anniversaries just placeholders until he found someone more exciting? There were moments when anger burned hot enough to cut through the fog. I wanted to smash that travel mug he carried every morning, to shout so loudly the whole neighborhood knew what he'd done. But then I'd see the kids coloring at the kitchen table, oblivious, and I'd swallow it all down because I didn't want to shatter their world too. Slowly, though, I began to see the shape of something steadier under the wreckage. Friends reached out. My sister dropped off dinner. A coworker invited me for coffee and listened without judgment. Even sitting alone in the quiet, I could sense a version of myself trying to surface. One who deserved honesty and didn't need to shrink just to keep someone else comfortable. I wasn't there yet, but I could almost picture it. A life not built on someone else's half-truths. After weeks of living inside a fog, I finally sat Adrian down one Saturday afternoon when the kids were at my sister's. I'd spent the whole morning writing notes so I wouldn't lose my nerve. He came into the living room looking wary, holding that same travel mug like it was armor. I told him I'd listened to every excuse, every half-truth, and I couldn't live inside his story anymore. I needed to know what he wanted. An honest marriage or the freedom to keep lying. He stared at the carpet for a long time, then mumbled something about trying to fix things. But his eyes didn't meet mine. There was no real remorse, just a man trying to preserve his comfort. That was the moment I realized I didn't have to stay in limbo. I'd been waiting for him to choose us, but the real choice was mine. I told him I'd be contacting a lawyer about a separation and that, for now, I needed him to move in with a friend. He sputtered, swore I was overreacting, then tried to charm his way out of it. The same smile that once melted me now felt like a mask. I didn't budge. The first night without him in the house felt strange. Quiet, yes, but also lighter, like the air had space in it again. The kids sensed something, so I kept explanations simple. Dad was staying somewhere else while we figured things out. I promised them they were loved and safe, and for the first time in months I actually believed myself. In the weeks since, I've learned more about my own strength than I ever expected. I learned that someone else's betrayal doesn't define my worth. I learned that protecting my peace sometimes means walking away, even when history tries to chain you to the spot. If anyone reading this is where I was, doubting your instincts, second-guessing the pit in your stomach, please listen to yourself. You deserve someone who values truth more than comfort, who doesn't build secret worlds while pretending to build a life with you. Adrian may still be spinning stories, but I'm done living inside them. I'm writing my own now, one that starts with clarity and ends finally in peace.